We're in a confusing time. So much going on that it's hard to figure out how to go forward. Given that the case, is it possible to say, I want to create the future? I think so. Stay tuned. I'm Tom Dorley of Sage Partners. I'll be your host today. My guest today is Rick Williams. Rick and I go back a few years, maybe a few more than we might not want to admit, to our time at a great consulting firm called Arthur D. Little. He and I were both junior consultants there, and we figured out how to do this thing called consulting, how to work with clients, understand what their issues were, and bring forward some answers that they could accept. Unfortunately, Arthur D. Little is not Arthur D. Little anymore. It's off in the winds because they didn't do what we advised our clients to do, and that has changed with the future. So Rick, since then, has gone on to a career that includes currently, he's an advisor to mid-market companies. He sits on their boards. He's a keynote speaker, and our topic today, he's just written a book called Compete. I was going to say Compete, Create the Future. Rick, welcome.
Thank you, Tom. It's always a pleasure to talk with you. I'm agreeing with you. We go back so many years that I don't think we want to really admit that, but we had a great experience together at Arthur D. Little. I enjoyed working with you, getting to know you, and have followed your career ever since.
So here we are now, several years later, in the midst of amazing amount of a change. So we use a metaphor that comes from wartime. During the course of war, things get so confusing, whatever, it's called the fog of war. So we pick that up and say there's so much going on right now, we call it the fog of change. And the question is, how do we deal with it? So as we think about it, and Rick, as you were working on what became your book a couple of years ago, what caused you to say, hey, I have something to contribute to this confusion. I have something to say. What caused you to write the book?
Well, Tom, that's a great question, and I'm going to give you the real answer to that question. But it's one of these things that after you've done it, anybody says, "Should I write a book?" And often the answer is, "Oh my God, don't do that. You don't realize how much it's going to take over your life." But in sort of the phase of my career that I've been in for a number of years, I've been doing a lot of speaking to leadership groups, serving on the board of directors. I'm a writer. So I've had, even though I've never had a title as a writer, I've always been from, when I was a kid in high school, okay, Rick is the one who can write it because he knows how to put things in a sentence or two, even though I really liked poetry when I was in high school. But regardless, I've been one of these people who's always been a writer and speaker for all of my career. And I get asked these questions of people say, well, you get up and give this talk about how you can be a more successful leader of your organization. Have you written a book? And I say, well, no. I mean, actually, I think I've written a lot of books. Tom, you and I know this.
Yeah.
Books that sit on somebody's bookshelf, and you hope your client reads them at some point, or at least at some point looked at them. But no, I haven't written a book you could buy on Amazon. And I thought long about, what did I have to say that would actually be of any value to the literature on leadership? And as I thought back to it, the experiences that I've had, again, with Arthur D. Little, but then later on in life when I was doing advisory work for middle-sized and smaller companies, what I realized is that many of if you're a big company with a big budget for an outside consulting or bring outside consultant on to help you make important decisions, that consultant brings on tools and ways of doing it and approaches that if you're a smaller organization, you don't have access to that kind of resource. And so what I ended up writing the book, Create the Future, is a handbook for making difficult decisions. It gives you the principles and tools that a large outside consulting company might use if they're doing it right, and brings those tools to you as a leader of a middle-sized or smaller organization that you can use largely on your own. Start out. Do you really understand what the opportunity or the threat is? What would success look like? How can you be creative about thinking about different options for where you might take the company in the future. Understand execution barriers. What really are the limits to what we as a company could do? I mean, it might be a great idea for some company, but could you really do it for
Mm-hmm.
your company?
Mm-hmm.
And then finally, when we make decisions about where we're taking the organization, where we're taking the company, that is not a simple, yeah, okay, I'm going to do this versus that. You have to think about what among the options that you've developed, how well do they match what your goals are for your organization? How do they play out in the risk profile of how much risk you're willing to take? And also, how do they express the values that you have as a leader, that the organization has? So it's how well they match goals, your risk preferences, and values as tools that you can use in deciding what you're actually going to do in the end. So, kind of a long answer to your question,
Yeah.
but I decided the book I was going to write was bringing those principles and tools to the leaders of mid-sized and smaller organizations.
Yeah. And I've read the book, and so I agree. It does just that. So perhaps maybe the first thing is that, so when you have the first conversation, let's say somebody's about your book, maybe is interested and wants to talk about you advising them. How do you get them started? How do you make the case? Because it seems to me that anytime a company is embarking or an organization is embarking on making a change, it's hard. So the first question is, well, wait a minute, now? Why now? Right? How hard is it, for example, to get over that first hump, and then how do you do it?
Well, I think it's an excellent question. I I'm going to answer your question a little bit more broadly. I mean, I know you know this, but I write about one of the things I've written a lot about is that to be successful, you need to be both decisive. In order, you need to be willing to make decisions.
Mm-hmm.
That in itself is a challenge for many people who are in a leadership position. Be willing to say, okay, my job is actually to make decisions. But the second part of it is that you need to be vulnerable. And I talk about vulnerability in the sense that being willing to say, I'm not really sure what to do here, or there may be better ideas than I have. And I'm open to learning from others. So those two components of it, saying, okay, my job as a leader is to make decisions. I will make decisions
Mm-hmm.
when I'm at the point where I have to make that, or I feel prepared to do that. But I'm also open to engaging with my team and key advisors and learning from them, bringing them into the process. And it's bringing them into the process of making me, as the leader, into a more successful leader of my organization. So that decisiveness and vulnerability, I think, is essential to successful leadership. So now you're asking the question, well, okay, how do you get to that point of saying, oh, gee, how are we really going to do this? I would start by thinking about how you think about yourself as a leader. Are you somebody who says, okay, I do recognize that in order to move forward, I am going to have to make some choices here, and they may, in many instances, will not be easy choices. And then the second, am I really prepared to learn from others and engage others and say, hey, um, I don't necessarily have all the answers. I have some views about this, but I really want to learn from you and bring other people into the process. I think that staging point is where you have to be in order to go through this successfully.
I like that. I have a good example of that comes from our time during COVID. We did a series at Sage Partners of what we called reigniting growth, how people are going to reignite growth. And one of our guests, because I did a sort of a panel discussion, was the CEO of King Arthur Baking. And it's not a big company, 400 employees, whatever, but she would talk about when she'd bring people together and she'd have these open forums. She'd say, here's what we're doing, all that sort of thing. Then it become the Q&A. And she said, I learned pretty early. If I didn't have the answer, I had to admit it. Because if I tried to work my way through it and said, well, this rut, it wouldn't work. I had to be authentic. And so I would always say, you listen, I don't know. The next time we'll gather, I'll see if I can have a better answer for you. So I think that's your point about vulnerability. And in a sense, she was saying, help me figure this out. I don't have all the answers, and no leader ever has all the answers. And so you're exactly right. How it is that you work through it. There's no question. Yeah.
Well, your drawing on an experience you personally had. When I get up and give a keynote speech about this, the example that I use is really Jack Kennedy, President Kennedy's experience with, first of all, the Bay of Pigs invasion and then the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Right.
That when he and I, if you don't mind, I'll spend a quick minute on this. When he
Sure,
first
sure.
came on as president, the CIA and the military had prepared under the Eisenhower administration a plan to bring Cuban exiles on to essentially land in Cuba and take over the Castro regime, which became known as the Bay of Pigs invasion. And they presented this plan to Kennedy within the first 4 or 5 months of his presidency. And he sort of said, oh, okay, well, I mean, if that's what you think is the right thing to do, go ahead. And it was a disaster. It was an example of failed leadership at the highest levels. And a year later, when he was then presented with evidence that the Russians were putting nuclear missiles into Cuba, he had learned from the Bay of Pigs invasion his shortcomings as a leader. Now, you think this is a guy who's already president of the United States. And rather than doing sort of the first instinct of what the military and others were saying needed to be a military response, he took time to say, well, wait a second, what's really going on here? I mean, what are the Russians really trying to do? What do we really know? What are our options here? What channels of communication can we have with Nikita Khrushchev, who was the Soviet premier at the time? Actually, I was with the guy who just written a really wonderful book on this, who said that Eisenhower, at this point, because I didn't know, was actually advising Kennedy to aggressively militarily respond to what the Russians were doing, not to wait for anything else. Eisenhower, unofficially was giving him that advice. But Kennedy said, wait a second, I'm not going to make the same mistake I made with the Bay of Pigs. I'm going to convene my team, give them responsibilities to go out and what are real options that we have here? What is the situation that we know is going on in Cuba? What is Castro really trying to do? And then he opened side channels with Khrushchev about what he was trying to do. And over a period of time, he then developed a plan, which was a partial blockade. He said to the Russians, we're not going to let ships in. If you do this, it's going to be a red line for us. So he developed a plan, which was drawing on the advice that he got from a wide range of his team and advisors. And that approach to leadership is really what all of us should be doing. We don't have to be running the United States or the Soviet Union. It's what we should be doing in our companies and our departments every time we have really tough decisions to say, wait a second, gang, let's sit down, make sure we really understand, hear from each other, develop a plan together that is more likely to be successful in the long run than just whatever my initial thoughts are, my initial reaction based on my gut instincts or what I might be aware of, because I might not understand all the issues that will impact the outcome of this decision.
And I think that's right. I think the huge lesson you pointed on was, as opposed to saying, let my military advisors, which was the Bay of Pigs, tell me what to do, he broadened the input, he broadened the sense of input and got lots of advice. I think that is terrific. And that's sort of the type of thing that says that I don't have all the answers, and nor do you, by the way. So let's together see if we can sort it out. So now let's take it from that perspective, Rick, and drop it into a specific situation you've had with a client, where you've had either as a board member or as an advisor to a client, and say, how does it work kind of tactically? How does it work when you're sort of in the arena with a company in a situation that is difficult for them?
Well, I have to say, I'm going to go way back to our Arthur D. Little days. Now, this, but I'll make as an introduction. I did a lot of work at the very senior level of the U.S. government as the U.S. federal government was developing environmental and energy policies. And one example sticks out in my mind that we were asked, Arthur D. Little, it's my
Mhm.
case assignment, my case responsibility. We were asked to help them decide what should be the environmental regulations for all oil and gas production in the United States, from little stripper wells all the way up to the big oil and gas platforms off the coast of California. And, you know, it was so the person who was the head of this at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, he had enormous conflicting interests on him, pressures on him as to what to do about this. And for those who don't know, when you don't just pump oil out of the ground or gas, what happens is that most of what's actually comes out of the ground is water. It's oil and gas mixed in with a lot of water. And in the old days, basically what was done with that water was just, spread it out in the field or whatever. It was just discarded randomly. And it's a pollutant. I mean, it's got
Mhm.
salt in it, it's got oil in it. It is a real pollutant. So doing
Mhm.
something about that was a core mission of the Environmental Protection Agency. And our assignment was to help the secretary make those decisions for what he should do. Now, if you don't mind, I'll just add one more thing. The most people will think about some huge oil platform that's pumping lots of oil all the time, making a lot of money. In truth, in the United States, most oil wells are little stripper wells. They're out there pumping away, and they may bring up a few hundred barrels a week or something like that. I'm not remember what the numbers are. But if you put very expensive regulations in place that are appropriate for a big offshore oil
Mhm.
platform,
Yeah.
they put all of the oil wells that are in Kentucky, in all over the United States, out of business. They instantly put them out of business. And so understanding the complexity of where is the real problem and how do you deal with the different levels of
Mhm.
production technology that are in the United States was a huge problem that he had to deal with. Anyway, what he had us do was develop that economics profile and financial profile and technology profile. And then we convened a whole meeting of his senior staff from all over the United States. We had prepared a workbook of decisions that he had to make. People got up and made presentations on different elements of this, and then crystallized what exactly are the decisions that he had to make.
Mhm.
And it was an incredible process because some people were saying, these are people working for him, and people who are consultants to the agency were saying, these people are making so goddamn much money. We shouldn't allow them to produce anything. I mean, pollute in any way. Other people were saying, if you put this stuff in, I will be defeated in my Senate seat because you're going to put all the oil and gas production out of business in places like Kentucky. I mentioned Kentucky,
Mhm.
but it's a real example. And anyway, so we brought all of that information together in a structured way to help him understand really what was going on, what the issues were, and what the decisions he had to make. And in the end, the oil and gas production regulations that are in place in the U.S. today came out of that process.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point because you actually talked about compromise. I'm going to pick that up later in our conversation. This idea of that if you are going to if you're going to be a leader and you are going to listen to divergent points of view, you have to be willing to say somebody on the other side of the issue might have something good. So you might have to do something
Right.
called compromise, which is right now a dirty word. We don't want to compromise. We want to win 100%. And that doesn't work. So let me give you an example from my point of view, and that is sort of a thing that we both learned, I'm sure, as young consultants and have picked up. Often, the question or the issue that brings you to the client is not the one that's the most important issue,
Right.
might not even be the issue at all. So I had a client, this goes back just a couple of years ago, $3 billion of revenue, that sort of thing, in a B2C business. And the CEO got me through a board member. And he said, listen, we haven't done a strategy for about 5 years. Can you come and refresh it? So he figured, you come in, you do a little SWOT analysis here, you look at a competitor there, and, you say, hey, tweak this, tweak that, and everything's fine. But it turned out that he was such a forceful CEO that virtually everything that they had decided at the board level, at the operating level, even at the implementation level was his. So everything that they had done was on his shoulders. So here comes the problem, because I looked at it and we found out pretty quickly that they had a couple of new ideas of things to do. That would be great. A little change here, a little modification of pricing strategy there. Terrific. But the big problem was he was making a mistake. He was investing in the businesses that had no future. And so it was a resource allocation question, which is strategy. So now the question is, how do you convince the CEO who made those decisions and who was a real strong guy to do this? And the answer was you had workarounds. So I worked with a board member. I worked with the CFO, and then we found one of the leaders of one of the divisions who had a particularly good relationship with the CEO. And in a workshop like the one you had with the EPA, we put a little story together, but he presented it. I didn't present it. I had the answer, but I gave somebody else the answer, and then it turned the corner and things worked out well. But this idea of creating the future has a lot to do with what you've said, your ability to reach outside of your comfort zone and bring in ideas that are not they're not comfortable, frankly, that are not your ideas. So as you sort of reflect on your work, Rick, and the concept of the book itself, how do you see going forward? Do you have hope that, given all the chaos that's going on in our world, our country, even technologically, geopolitically, issues around who's getting what kind of information from media, most of it's disinformation and all that, do you have faith? Do you have hope that these ideas that you're bringing forth in terms of creating the future might actually work for us?
Wow. This is it's a big question.
It is. Yeah.
We live in a moment in which here we are in 2026, in which Donald Trump is president of the United States.
Right.
And I have an article in process. It isn't finished yet, but an article in process about leadership lessons learned from Donald Trump's leadership, particularly of how he's leading us in the war in Iran. And I'm also just going to say, that we're in a moment when Barney Frank, who was a congressman from here from Massachusetts.
He was actually my congressman in Wellesley. Yes, he was. Yeah.
So he just passed away. And it's relevant because Barney Frank was one of these people, and I'm going to bring it back to your question in a second, but Barney Frank was one of these people who I think was a very gifted legislator. And a big deal is being made in the press about the fact that he was gay, and that they're promoting him as, he was the first openly gay congressman. Well, Barney Frank was a very successful and important congressman who happened to be gay. Mm-hmm. He was not somebody who was putting gayness in your face all the time. Absolutely not. And I have a great admiration for the work that he did. And I say that in the context of Trump as a leader, because in a way, Trump is one of these people who, for a whole bunch of reasons, has gotten to be president, who I think is actually trying to do some things that have needed to be done for years in many different ways. But he does it in a way that he's sort of putting it in your face all the time. And it makes it very difficult for people to listen to what I think in some ways are really good things that he's doing for some things.
Sure.
Because it's hard to hear somebody who sees himself not so much as a leader like Jack Kennedy was with the Cuban Missile Crisis, who had to make important decisions that might end up resulting in nuclear war, which is what Kennedy was deciding on, versus in Trump's situation, somebody who says, gee, we have to change our relationship with Europe and NATO and trade because of we're now in a different position with each other relative than we were 50 years ago. but he does it in a way that is so in your face and argumentative
Hmm.
that it makes it difficult to hear and understand the what there is that is actually important in what he's saying. And I think that is a big failure of him as a leader. He sees himself many ways as more the entertainer that he was and commentator
Yeah.
rather than being a leader. And so am
If
I
I'm not, let me just comment on that because I think you're right. There's sort of, it's a matter of what he's doing and how he's doing it. And if you look at when people do, you ask the question in the poll, do you think of that Iran should have a nuclear weapon? 85% of people say no. And yet when you ask them, how's the war going? It's the other way around. And it is that whole thing about how you take an issue. And let me give you sort of a simple example of that. So after the Second World War, probably the biggest single thing that we did was the Marshall Plan. My God, who puts our own treasure to rebuild the defeated adversary? But we did. Now, my understanding was, if I understand the history, was that was one of them. Truman was the president, and it was a key idea of his. But he knew he couldn't call it the Truman Plan because at that point people didn't like him because dropping the bomb and things like that, all that. So he came up. There was a Marshall Plan. That is a leader, right?
right?
You may think he was a bumbling whatever.
Exactly, as opposed to the Trump plan. Exactly,
Yeah,
that's
no,
exactly a
exactly.
very good
Exactly.
example.
Exactly right. Yeah, yeah. So you're saying though, so that you think though, Rick, that there might be some hope that we can figure it out, that we can in fact come together.
Okay. The only thing that we can do, that people like you, people like me, the people who are listening to this, the only thing we can do is we can make our contribution. We can keep talking about creating we can keep talking about your responsibility as a leader is to create the future by the decisions you make today. That's what we can do. We can be really clear that we are creating the future by the decisions we make today. We can be really clear that in order to be successful in our job as a leader, we must be decisive and we must be vulnerable. Both of those. We can be really clear that we are okay with who we are, and we're going to make mistakes and we're not perfect, but we're going to keep moving forward in a way that is better for not just ourselves, but our families, our community, our company, and our country, and the world as a whole. That is all we can do. And, it's people like you, Tom, and others that are the hope of the future, because you keep talking about it and keep and we keep moving forward on that basis, because that is how our civilization will survive if it does. And I think it will, but we've got to keep seeing that we individually are responsible for carrying it on.
I think you're right about that. And I think it's a matter of being active and being, but it also is a matter of being able to listen. So one of the things that concerns me right now, how hard it is for people to listen to each other. Right. And fortunately in our family and my friends group, I've never had anybody that's blown apart and said, I'll never speak to you again because, right. But I understand that happens, right? People have disrupted friendships and family relationships because of that. So it's really important to be able to say that somebody over there might just have a good idea, right? That I hadn't thought of, even though they vote for the other side, and let me listen to them. And I think that's important. I hope we get there too. Yeah.
Right. I agree with you. I agree with you completely. It's just, it's that I do not have, I know you don't have, but I certainly don't have all the answers.
Right.
And I will be a more complete human being. I'll be a better leader. I'll be a better citizen. I'll be a better husband, father, parent, if I'm open to learning from other people. Yeah. And it doesn't mean I'm a jerk because I don't know everything. I know we as guys have difficulty with that idea, but in truth, we're actually stronger as guys, and anybody, women also, if we say, hey, I'm going to be better off if I listen to what you have to say and learn from you and learn from other people. Now, I'll make up my mind in the end about what I'm going to do.
Sure.
But I'm at least going to listen and try to learn from others.
Right. So Peggy Noonan, who I think is a great speechwriter, she made a comment about people thinking that they're the smartest person in the room. And her advice to people is that it better be a very small room.
Right.
And so, right. I mean, that's the way it is. So, Rick, I think you're onto something here with the idea of the ability to create the future. I certainly believe it's possible. And I have two grandchildren who are on their way. One is just graduating from high school. And I certainly try to tell her that she ought to think of herself kind of as a startup. Her name is Nola. She's Nola the startup. And now she has all these things that she can draw up. She's had a wonderful family growing up. She's been educated so far, great. She's going on to Dartmouth, which is great. And so all these things you have, Nola, you are Nola LLC or Nola, Inc. or something. And think of yourself like that, and just say, my God, what a wonderful time this is. Challenges, yes. Threats, yes. And we can mess it up, right? But what a wonderful time it is.
Right.
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 Hey, Rick, thank you for this conversation. Let's stay in touch. Next time, let's do it over a cup of coffee or maybe even a glass of wine somewhere in the Seaport area of Boston. So thank you for joining.
Take care, Tom. Thank you for having me on.
Great. And thank you all for listening. Until the next time we're together, stay tuned. Be well. Be careful. Take care. Change has never come faster or hit us harder. In the fog, leadership is the light that cuts through. I'm Tom Dorley. Thanks for joining me on our Focus on Growth, Navigating the Fog of Change series. Until the next time, keep leading forward.